Alright, so in this video we're going to talk about how we can find inverses of linear functions. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the graph of this particular function. And hopefully you guys can tell me that just by looking at the equation, the y-intercept is 4. And the slope is 2, or negative 2, so we're down to n over 1. And how we find this x-intercept is by plugging 0 in for that f of x, and then solve for x by subtracting 4, and then dividing by negative 2, so the x-intercept is 2, 0. What we're going to do is come back to the screen after we find the inverse, and we're going to graph the inverse, and that's going to tell us something about inverse functions, hopefully. So to find the inverse of this function, we are starting with f of x equals negative 2x plus 4. And the first step that we're going to do, some of you are really comfortable with working with f of x, so we're just going to change that to y. Y equals negative 2x plus 4. That's the first step. And the second step of inverses is swapping the x and the y. So we're going to rewrite this function as x equals negative 2y plus 4. All we're doing is swapping the x and the y. And hopefully this is something you're going to see, that is the main concept behind inverse functions, is that swapping of the x and the y. So now when we do this, we're going to solve this equation then for y. First by subtracting 4. So we have x minus 4 is equal to negative 2y. And finally, by dividing by negative 2. And we're going to divide everything by negative 2. So what we end up with is the equation y is equal to negative 1/2 x. Dividing by negative 2 is the same thing as multiplying by negative 1/2. And the reason we do that is so that it's easier for us to find the slope. And then negative 4 divided by negative 2 is positive 2. And then the final step for this inverse, instead of writing it equal to y, the notation for the inverse is f with the little negative 1 in the superscript there, of x is equal to negative 1/2 x plus 2. So then when we graph this inverse function, we'll take a look at that. The inverse function is negative 1/2 x plus 2. The y-intercept is 2. And the slope is negative 1/2. And again, to find the x-intercept, we plug 0 in for this f of x term, and solve for x. We subtract 2, and then multiply by negative 2, so x is equal to 4. So there's our x-intercept. And one thing you'll notice with these inverse functions, the x-intercept of the original became the y-intercept of the inverse, and the y-intercept of the original became the x-intercept of the inverse. So one thing you will notice, the x and the y coordinates just swapped from original to inverse. And actually, that is the only example we're going to look at. Tomorrow in class, you're going to get a ton of practice of writing inverses.